All right, good afternoon, folks and friends out there in Cyberland. This is your Curious Curator, Brian York, here at the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum. Today we're standing here next to our little friend, the B-25 Mitchell. And I just want to give you a little background information, talk a little bit about this, and kind of take a little tour of our Doolittle exhibit. The B-25 was first developed in 1939, but prior to that, North American was developing an aircraft they had dubbed NA-40. Now, it was very similar to the B-25, and it's what this was developed into, but it wasn't as sleek as you see the nice lines and aerodynamic lines on this. It wasn't as fast. It could not carry the same load. The engines were a lot smaller than the Wright 2400s that they've got on this, but it did enable them to build this aircraft. Now, in 1939, the U.S. Army Air Forces put a call out to the aviation industry to develop a new medium bomber. They wanted something that could carry about 3,000 pounds of bombs, have a range around 2,000 miles, max speed of 300 miles an hour, and be able to function really well between 8,000 and 14,000 feet. So North American jumped right in that and developed the B-25 quickly out of the NA-40, and it was being produced by 1940. So within a year, going through design development and then going into production. Between 1940 and 1945, they built over 9,800 B-25s. Now, the B-25 would carry a crew of 6. You would have a pilot, a co-pilot, bombardier navigator, dual position up here in the nose. They'd have radio operator, a waist gunner that we'll see a little bit later, and a tail gunner in that. That proved to be very, very efficient. It was so efficient that the B-25 served in every theater of war during World War II. It was in Europe, it was in North Africa, the China, Burma, India theater, and the Pacific theater. And so it proved to be a very, very good aircraft. In fact, all the way, it was serving in the U.S. Air Force all the way up to 1960. So let's go take a look at our Doolittle raid. Okay, now with the B-25, it's most notable in World War II for the Doolittle raid, going to April 18th, 1942. Now, you think back to just before then, you had December 7th, 1941. The Japanese did a surprise attack and really did some devastation at Pearl Harbor. The U.S., a lot of the military leaders knew that we needed to strike back, one, just to build morale within the United States, but also to force the Japanese to withdraw a little bit, knowing that their home islands are in danger. Now, the B-25 was chosen for this particular mission largely because of the power of the engines. And just so everyone knows, we've got a great heartland connection to this. We've got Lieutenant Dick Joyce, pilot of aircraft number 10. We have Sergeant Fitzmaurice, who was a gunner on aircraft number 8. And then there's another one who I believe he was Lieutenant Charles Greening out of Carroll, Nebraska, who was a crew member of aircraft number 11. Now, back to our story on the Doolittle Raiders. They chose the aircraft, they had the crews, they did their training down in Eglin Air Base, trying to make sure they could actually take off of an aircraft carrier. And once they had that perfected, they moved all their aircraft out to San Francisco, California to load on the carrier. Now, as you can imagine, carriers today would have no problem handling 24 B-25s for as many aircraft as they carried. But in World War II, you had some flat tops that were a lot smaller. The USS Hornet was the designated carrier for this particular mission. They loaded up 16 aircraft and realized they're out of room. A lot of it is you had to park your aircraft at the end. You didn't have your elevators moving the aircraft up and down, and they needed a certain amount of distance to get off the flight deck. Now, another interesting aspect of this is as they looked at the mission, normally they were using the Norden bomb sight, the super accurate bomb sight that's going to make sure they hit their targets dead center. But the challenge is they don't want that falling into Japanese hands. So Lieutenant Greening out of Carroll, Iowa, pilot aircraft number 11, came up with the idea and made a simple bomb sight. It's affectionately known as the Mark Twain, or the 20-cent bomb sight. And the reason it's called that is that's what it costs to make those. So they came up with this largely because they were not going to be flying at high altitude. They're going to fly fairly low altitude. So something simple as this will make them accurate enough to do that. Now, as they were flying on this mission, or going on this mission, one of the things they ran into is they were spotted farther out than they anticipated, about 700 miles from their target. They wanted to take off 400 miles from the target, which would give them just enough fuel to get to China. So being spotted 700 miles out, they had to make a decision. Now, the way the story goes is Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle took all the members into an area to brief them and said, here's what we've got to do. We've got to launch early, 150 miles early. You don't have enough fuel. You'll make it probably to your bomb site. You're probably not going to make it to land. It's a one-way trip. And he said, absolutely, anybody wants to drop out, no problem. Not a single hand raised. They all agreed to go on. And then you have the folklore, the stories of how they stripped their aircrafts down, added extra fuel just to make that. What is very miraculous is every aircraft made it. One aircraft actually landed safely up in Russia, and they lost 3 crew members out of this entire mission. Just a fantastic, incredible story. Now let's talk a little bit about another aircraft we have in here, and that's our B-25 cutaway. All right, the museum, we actually have 1.5 B-25s. Now that's not a 12.5 aircraft, it's 1.5 aircraft. In here, when you come in here, you'll be able to look and see, you can see the different positions. You have your cockpit with your pilot and co-pilot. You have an area behind them that you can have a flight engineer. Ours actually had been modified after production, so they added 2 passenger seats, which all look so comfortable. Behind them, you have the bomb bay. This is where they're going to load up all different sizes of bombs so that they can have different missions. They can do a lot of different things on that. And if you can imagine being the bombardier and going to have to arm all these bombs, actually crawling back in there and doing that. And then after that, you've got radio operator and waist gunner. And then all the way in the back there is the tail gunner position. Now this B-25 right here, this was built for the U.S. Army Air Force's mid-1946. It was delivered to them. It was shuffled around a bit and then was taken out of service by 1960, at which time it was put up for auction. And interesting is a company out of Papillion, Nebraska actually purchased this aircraft plus 2 others and had them flown to the South Omaha airport, where they retrofitted them to carry either for crop dusting or firefighting. They hadn't decided what they're going to do yet. And in the testing, this aircraft had a bit of a hard landing and went off the side of the runway. Well, the company wasn't able to continue, and they were looking to sell the aircraft. They sold the other 2 that could fly. This one got left behind, eventually moved to Epley Airfield, and there it sat. And finally, the company donated it to the SAC Museum when they were at Offutt. And once it got there, the folks that were working at the museum at the time got this great idea: is why don't we strip some of this away? Let's let our visitors come in and see how an airplane looks on the inside, how it is built, see how that construction is done. And our restoration team here has maintained that and has added lighting and a lot of great things to that. So now you guys will be able to come in and see this wonderful aircraft that actually belongs to the museum. All right, folks, that's all I have for today. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. This is always a lot of fun sharing these aircraft with all of you. Don't forget to go to our website and look up our Curator's blog, as we're constantly adding new content. I'll have a lot more to talk about Dick Joyce and Fitzmaurice, and we'll be talking a lot more about a lot of other aircraft, a lot of other things that we get to tour. Thanks a lot, and you guys have a great day.